forgot the most important part of my bio, which was I'm a New Jersey resident who used to go to Japanese school here at Princeton on Sundays. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and thank you so much, Professor Rexler, for that kind introduction. And thank you in particular, too, as well, to the faculty and the leadership team at the Andlinger Center for inviting me here to your annual meeting today. So let me get us started. I'm really honored to be here speaking alongside so many other talented speakers and presenters for today's panels. What I thought I would do this morning is just kick off and provide an overview of a couple of key themes that you'll see throughout the day, and just provide a perspective from Microsoft on how we're approaching many of these issues for such an important topic that we're going to discuss. So I want to start actually a little bit different place than Princeton, New Jersey. I want to start by sharing that I recently just arrived back from the COP16, the Biodiversity Conference in Colombia, in Cali, Colombia, where I arrived about 2 days ago back here. COP16, the Biodiversity Conference, brought together policymakers, private sector leaders, entrepreneurs, non-governmental organizations, and innovators coming together to address a really alarming decline in deforestation and biodiversity and habitat loss. The loss of these species affect all of us. They form the link to larger ecosystems that regulate our climate, provide us food and clean water and critical resources. And it's a challenge to protect these vast resources. They're large, they're complex, they truly are a planetary-sized problem. But at COP16, we were able to share new insights into how technology, especially AI, is playing an increasingly valuable role in biodiversity conservation. Managing protecting Earth's vast biodiversity and resources requires processing immense amount of data and quickly. AI's unparalleled ability to scale and accelerate these efforts is vital to ensuring conservationists can take timely and impactful decisions. So let me share a brief video.
The Amazon is losing 10,000 acres a day due to deforestation. This continuous destruction is devastating millions of species that call the Amazon home. Introducing Project Guacamaya, a new scientific partnership using AI to speed up data analysis. AI identifies what species are making those sounds and tells us if the rainforest is in distress. Together, researchers are changing the future of the Amazon in ways never imagined before with AI.
So you might be wondering, why are we talking about biodiversity, COP16? Those that walked in just now probably think, am I in the wrong room? But you're not. It's because this is just one recent example of how technology can reveal insights that were once hidden, empowering us all to take actions in ways that were not even possible before. It's also a reminder that when we're seeing the accelerating potential of AI for sustainability or energy, there are ways that it can be done in real, concrete, and tangible ways, like in biodiversity, but also like in accelerating the energy transition, a topic we'll be discussing today. So this morning, I'm going to talk more to you about the technology behind the impact you just saw, how we apply it for the energy transition, and how we're working to address it, to address the real challenges when it comes to powering this infrastructure that we need for AI. We're in an urgent moment for not only climate action, but also for driving the innovative technology solutions, and the progress we can achieve is truly remarkable. So before I dive into it, a quick introduction. Melanie Nakagawa, Chief Sustainability Officer at Microsoft, and really my career spanned the intersection of these three pillars of policy, technology, and finance. And as the Chief Sustainability Officer at Microsoft, we're working really hard to address our climate ambitions around being carbon negative by 2030, water positive, a zero waste business, and one that protects ecosystems. But beyond Microsoft, our impact is really focused on extending beyond our four walls. It's not just about our operational commitment, it's really about what we can do to empower customers and partners and individuals around the world with the technology needed to meet their own climate goals, their own sustainability commitments, to accelerate the energy transition, and frankly, catalyze global progress by investing in new solutions and technologies and advocating for policies that can support a net zero future. We believe that those that can do more should, and for Microsoft to do well, we need the world to do well. It may not be a surprise to many of you about the intersection of AI and sustainability, but that's a core focus for our team right now. So this morning, we're going to walk through both the opportunities and the challenges that we face in this AI revolution, and more specifically, what it means for sustainability in the energy sector. So by a show of hands, how many of you used an app this morning on your phone to get to this building. I did as well. Behind that technology, what many of us don't often put together is that behind what the app is or what's on a tablet or your device is a physical space. It's infrastructure, it's data centers. The same is true for cloud computing, the one that I just showed you in that video, and the one that makes it possible to track and map species like birds in the Amazon is all backed by a technology and actual hardware in a physical space. These data centers create models that can do incredible things that can support our daily lives, and when applied for the energy transition, can also help accelerate sustainability. So now I want to be more specific about what these capabilities mean for the energy transition. So the first example is around resource management. At Microsoft, we remain steadfast in our commitment to become carbon negative, and we're taking action to address that resource intensity. But at the same time, what we'll hear more about today is the application of AI is already having a positive impact on the journey to net zero. I'll share two examples, one from resource management, one from material discovery. And in particular, I want to walk through the fact that AI is already in the wild today. It's being used to deliver many of these impacts, and we're only at the beginning of this journey. We often think about AI as something that's futuristic or coming, and I like to always ground ourselves in that the fact that it's already here today and the types of impacts it's already delivering. So as highlighted by the International Energy Agency, complete grid decarbonization is going to require a multi-technology approach. A broad range of carbon-free technologies will be needed, from solar, wind, geothermal, nuclear, energy efficiency, storage, as well as energy transmission. That transmission infrastructure is critical to making this whole ecosystem work. We also know that some of the innovation needed by 2030 also needs a lot more investment as well. So back in 2020, Microsoft announced a commitment to $1 billion climate innovation fund to invest in those emerging solutions, including those that put AI to work to expand and optimize grid infrastructure. We invested in dynamic line rating companies. One in particular is a company called Line Vision, which is using AI to expand the capacity of existing transmission lines. Line Vision's AI-driven approach can increase capacity of existing transmission lines by 60%. We're also seeing opportunities in the AI's use for predictive analytics, including forecasting and maintenance prediction. Companies like Raptor Maps use advanced imagery processing, sensor data, and machine learning to better monitor and maintain renewable assets. Back in 2022, Raptor Maps helped the industry recover more than 3% in energy loss, equating to around $80+ million in revenue loss prevented, and adding around, and they prevented this across around 24 gigawatts analyzed in that 2022 study. AI can also equip utilities and grid operators with the insights and tools for grid optimization, allowing automation and efficient operations of a more distributed and flexible grid. For example, the company Utilidata. This is using AI-powered technology that provides utilities with robust real-time insights into how to operate a connected grid. Utilidata captures high-quality data at the meter level to help utilities make smarter and timely decisions. Their AI-driven solutions have been shown to improve grid efficiency significantly. Utilities using the voltage control technologies have reported energy savings of up to 5%. And customers benefit from more resilient grids that minimize unexpected outages and prolong the life of electrical equipment as well. The next example is in new material discovery. Professor, we talked a little bit about this at the top, and I think we'll discuss it more today. But I'll give you one example that we've been seeing and we've been working through. It's how AI is already having a positive impact in the energy transition when applied to the discovery of new materials, both faster and cheaper. And this is important because for the climate crisis, for the transition, time is of the essence. The example I want to share is the acceleration of the discovery of a new type of sustainable battery material. Through a collaboration with Pacific Northwest National Laboratory and using Microsoft's Azure Quantum Elements platform, we're working to accelerate that discovery process. So earlier this year, we announced the findings of one of our partnerships with PNNL. AI models screened 32 million possible material candidates to make a battery. They narrowed them down to around 500,000 viable candidates and did a second level analysis, reducing the number to 18 materials within 80 hours. This is a process that would have taken weeks, months, if not years to do through trial and error. And using AI and machine learning capabilities, we're able to do that in the course of arguably 2 weeks. And for some, I guess, Princeton students, 80 hours is 1 week of time. So this approach not only speeds the discovery of new materials, but it also makes the process more efficient and less resource intensive. This battery that was prototyped, we expect would use 70% less lithium, once it's in production. So those are a few examples of how AI is having a positive impact on the energy transition today. And we believe we're just at the very beginning of realizing the full potential of AI to accelerate these solutions. Later today, we'll talk more about and hear more about the opportunities to have the positive impact on the transition. But amid this promise, we also know that the electricity and the infrastructure needed for those technologies today is also increasing. So I want to share our approach to this challenge and the steps we're taking to address it. At Microsoft, we seek to enable a decarbonized grid for our company, for our customers, and for our world. It's part of a commitment to support a more sustainable future and on our way to being a carbon negative company by 2030. And we're dedicating significant resources to advancing this goal and adding more carbon-free electricity and capacity to the grids where we operate. There are three elements of this I want to talk about: energy, how we're bringing more energy to the grids; the infrastructure, how we're working to lower the embodied carbon and the supply chain in those building materials to build the infrastructure; and third, the importance of the communities in which we operate in. So let's dive into each of these approaches. So first, as AI continues to grow, we know we need to bring more energy to the grids. As the panels later today will discuss more broadly, the global clean energy transition will require more electricity, not less, to meet key sectors, including growing electricity demands from charging electric vehicles to repowering industrial manufacturing, retrofitting the building sector, and many others. So when it comes to advanced cloud services and AI services, this growth is being met by accelerating our efforts to grow the availability of renewable energy and carbon-free resources. One of the tools we often use are power purchase agreements, or PPAs, and they're central to this approach. These types of agreements help put confidence into the energy markets and help us expand clean energy solutions around the world, not just to support our power needs, but to support those of the supply chain as well. So far, Microsoft has contracted 34 gigawatts of renewable energy across 24 countries, marking significant progress toward accelerating renewable energy markets and supporting the global energy transition. Microsoft is one of the largest corporate purchasers of renewable energy, and we continue to seek ways to diversify and scale up supply of impactful renewable energy and mechanism enabling access for all. We've also contracted roughly around this 34 gigawatts also translates into around 135 renewable energy projects across our PPA portfolio. That's a really powerful mechanism for scaling the energy transition. As our energy needs grow, we're also working to scale our carbon-free energy power as well through new innovative mechanisms and scalable mechanisms. Earlier this year, we announced a 5-year agreement, a global agreement with Brookfield Asset Management and Brookfield Renewable to develop a pathway for over 10.5 gigawatts of new renewable energy capacity in the US and Europe. This is almost 8 times larger than the largest corporate PPA ever signed. This agreement provides an incentive for Brookfield to build a large portfolio of new renewable energy projects in the coming year, contributing to the decarbonization of the grids around the world. And this helps match it to the areas where we are also growing our load and demand. Another example of the scaling that's happening in parallel with the scale of AI growth is the announcement we made last month in September with Constellation. We announced a power purchase agreement with Constellation that will enable the restart of over 800 megawatts of a nuclear facility at 3 Mile Island in Unit 1, helping to bring more capacity into the PJM market, which is a constrained market, but also an area where you're seeing AI load growth increase. These are just 2 examples of the scaling that's happening by companies like Microsoft and others. As AI and infrastructure growth scales, you're seeing the scale of these mechanisms like PPA at a level we've never seen before. The next piece I want to talk a little bit about is infrastructure. In addition to how we power our data centers, it's also important to recognize that we're building physical materials and physical infrastructure. In fact, for Microsoft, in our last year's sustainability report, we talked about how 96% of our reported emissions in our sustainability report is actually coming from our supply chain and our value chain. So these are things like the chips we put into our data centers, the cement, the steel, the concrete, and the fuels. That's the majority of where the carbon footprint, the 29% increase in our overall footprint, where it came from, is coming from the embodied carbon in that built infrastructure. As we physically grow, it's requiring the growth in this type of built environment. And so what we need to do is we need to build with lower carbon. We need to build with lower carbon resources and build with lower carbon materials. The embodied carbon in semiconductor chips or low carbon fuel are key levers to reducing that impact. And we're advancing this in many ways. So we take the building materials, Building materials such as cement and steel are currently some of the highest contributors to the carbon cost of new construction, together producing an estimated 13.5% of global carbon emissions. So we're really looking for innovations in green steel, green concrete, to help lower that embodied carbon as we physically build. As I mentioned, we have the Climate Innovation Fund that invests in these new emerging technologies. And earlier over the last several years, we've made some investments in this space. To highlight two of them, one of them is Boston Metal, the other is H2 Green Steel, now renamed Stegra, which are helping to expand the market of near zero carbon steel, which can help deliver up to 95% lower CO2 emissions than conventional steel. We're also helping to evaluate the use of low emissions concrete for the built environment in our supply chain as well. We're piloting environmental attribute certificate purchases and a book and claim system as part of Microsoft's overall strategy to reduce the embodied carbon from our supply chain. This complements our investments in companies that are also innovating sustainable materials and efforts to procure and install low carbon building materials. And finally, I want to talk about communities. Over the last year, we've witnessed a remarkable acceleration in AI adoption, opening a new frontier of innovation, discovery, and solutions. This surge in AI is not just about technological advancement. It's also about harnessing the potential to promote innovation, tackle some of the society's largest challenges, and change lives for the better. I'm glad that Dean Rexford opened with talking about the communities and Titletown Tech, because it's a key part of how we think about the ecosystem in which we operate in. Yes, it's the data centers, it's the physical infrastructure, but it's also about what we're doing in our responsibility in the communities around these locations. And it's reflected in our commitment to ensure broad access to our technology that empowers organizations and individuals. We want to operate responsibly as a good neighbor. Being a responsible neighbor is simple but important as we think about the approach. It's about the design of our data centers with the environment and communities in mind, and it's about collaboration with the local communities to listen to their needs and follow through on our commitments. Our partnership with nonprofits and our supply chain help to expand that access for all. So we're implementing programs such as the Titletown Tech, which was talked about earlier this morning, but also programs like TechSpark. TechSpark is a program that was founded in 2017. It started with 7 communities, and it's grown to over 50 states, securing over $125 million in community funding and helping provide skills for over 55,000 people and creating over 3,000 jobs. It's also not just about that, but it's also about the skilling and the advancing of the community as well. We want to deliver significant local and economic and social and environmental benefits around where we operate by partnering with local stakeholders, by creating apprenticeship opportunities, and digital skills training as well. Our investments in the local sustainability to restore sensitive habitats like water restoration projects and improving infrastructure is important for the communities where we are. And another key part to how we think about our community impact is what we're doing around environmental justice. Our investments in communities often extends beyond where we just locate. It extends to applying the principles of environmental justice to how we power our infrastructure as well. Starting with local collaboration with partners and stakeholders, we want to understand the needs and opportunities. And so we started to structure some sustainability procurement mechanisms that include environmental justice co-benefits in areas such as renewable energy procurement. We've signed renewable energy deals that help prioritize access to energy, to clean energy for low-income communities, provide for inclusive workforce development opportunities, and for supporting community-led climate resilience. I'll give a couple examples of those as well. So we've partnered in a PPA with Volt Energy Utility. This PPA for a 250 megawatt utility scale solar project between Microsoft and Volt, an African-American owned solar development firm. The project will generate enough energy, clean power to power around 4,500 homes. And the agreement also includes a community impact funds that will aim at inclusive economic development opportunities for underserved communities and rural minority communities as well. Another agreement we signed was with Pivot Energy to deliver 500 megawatts of distributed generation across 100 communities in 20 states, providing tangible benefits to low-income households such as energy bill savings, local job creation, and more, and clean energy power as well. Enough to power, in that case, around 90,000 homes. And we're also working for solutions that help enable data centers to provide energy back to the grid to contribute to local energy supply during times of higher demand. So for example, in Ireland, we built batteries into wind turbines for wind energy projects to capture energy when the wind turbines overperform and deliver that energy, that excess energy back into the grid. In Denmark, excess heat that's been created by data centers will provide heat back to the local community, providing enough heat to warm around 6,000 homes in that community. So these are examples of how our work to use data centers as a source of electricity or heat can help relieve pressure on those local grids. So as I wrap up before we get to question and answer, and hopefully this provided a lot of fodder for a robust set of discussions, I want to leave you a little bit more about the urgency than maybe you had when you walked into this room. Last week, the United Nations released an annual emissions gap report, and the highlights from that report were quite sobering. It showed that the world is not on track. The world is not on track for the Paris Agreement commitments, but more importantly, it showed that the world is on track for around a 3.1 degree rise, Celsius degrees rise by the end of the century. This is significantly above the Paris Agreement targets of 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees Celsius. It also showed that global greenhouse gas emissions rose by 1.3% in 2023, reaching their highest levels in history. So to stay on a least cost pathway to 1.5 degrees Celsius, emissions must actually fall by 42% by 2030 and 57% by 2035 compared to 2019 levels. This translates to roughly an annual reduction of around 7.5% until 2035. What this means is the world needs massive investments in clean energy, carbon-free power, renewables, reforestation, reforms to how we build buildings, move around in transportation, and what we're doing in the industrial sectors. Public and private sector partnerships are going to be critical if governments are going to be able to implement the policies they need and meet their critical national climate reduction plans, and to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. The world needs urgent action and solutions that allow us to meet the speed and scale of the progress that is required from all of us. We need every tool at our disposal, including leveraging the powerful solutions that are now possible with AI. And we need to continue this journey together because none of us can do it alone. So today, as we go through the panels and we have this discussion and connect in these halls, I encourage all of us to see how we can partner together, both in this room, how we can conduct research, think about new areas of study, and new types of innovation that can come together to advance progress and help achieve the speed and scale for sustainability and the energy transition that the world urgently needs. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share Microsoft's approach to accelerating the energy transition with AI and managing the impacts of it as well.
Thank you so much. Those of you that don't have a seat yet, please feel free to come on in. We have lots of seats throughout. Thanks so much for your remarks. Really appreciate it. One thing I'm intrigued about is this role that you have of Chief Sustainability Officer. I'm curious, is this a role that's becoming common in companies? What does that mean? And also, how do we make more of them? Like, what do people like you need to know and learn to be able to do your jobs?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, was this on? We're good? Why? Got it. So, great question. The role of a Chief Sustainability Officer, I'm happy to say, is one that is actually increasing. I was earlier this year, these are different metrics you can use of different conferences you attend, and there was a reporter that had commented one of the big conferences that happens in Switzerland around, private sector engagement. He had said about 4 years ago, there was maybe, a dozen or so named Chief Sustainability Officers showing up with these companies. And then earlier this year, I think it was over 50. And the growing role of the Chief Sustainability Officer in many of these companies, I find really exciting, because what it shows is that it's not just a commitment to how we think about sustainability in businesses, but what you're also seeing is the evolution of the role of a CSO, moving more from being a corporate social responsibility, impact-focused role to one that is part of, how we do business. It's core to business alignment and operational growth, and core to the license to operate for many of these companies. And so for my role at Microsoft, it's an evolution around how we view sustainability as a corp-wide function and a way to convene across all of the business units across a business like Microsoft to work together to collaborate to actually advance our sustainability commitments across the 4 areas that I had mentioned earlier. So that's sort of the evolution of this role. And what's been great is that it's a really wonderful community of CSOs that are continuing to gather and come together and talk about the challenges of these roles, but also the opportunities we have in these large businesses to actually drive a more positive change.
Yeah, it's interesting. Government agencies, both at the state and federal level, are also starting to create chief AI officers, right? And it's sort of, I think there too, these roles are so important, and figuring out what training people need. I'm curious. I mean, your background, you've had a really interesting career with a lot of time spent in government and policy. I'm curious if you have thoughts, as there's a growing need to have people doing the important work you're doing. Are there things we can be doing at educational institutions to be fostering, future leaders like yourself?
I really love the idea of a multi-sectoral approach to how we address sustainability, that you need people with a diverse professional background and a diverse skill set to achieve the change we're going to need. It's not just one piece, but an interdisciplinary approach to how we think about sustainability. And the reason for that is ultimately this is a systems challenge. It's not just one part of the widget, but it really is the whole ecosystem coming together to actually deliver the impact. So in the case of, energy and AI, it's not just, at the way we design a chip inside a data center. It's then how we put that chip in a full rack, how that rack is designed, where it's laid out physically in a data center. And then it's about not only how that data center is powered, but how it's built. And then where does the excess waste go from that data center? And then ultimately the models that data center runs. And so in something like that, in each of those areas, everything from, a construction worker, an electrician, a data scientist, an architect, and it kind of goes on and on to a systems engineer. And so, people with a diverse set of backgrounds and skill sets, I think, are critical if we're going to advance sustainability throughout that entire chain, so that companies like Microsoft and others can meet ambitious carbon goals.
Fantastic. So the work that you described in your talk, I mean, there's an implicit sort of democratizing of access to AI so that communities and individuals are really empowered to do important work on problems they recognize in their communities. And so there seem to be at least 2 pieces to that. One is education, which you talked a little bit about, and the other is sort of access to the technology that people need, whether it's software or GPUs or things of that ilk. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts on how to approach both those problems in the education and training, as well as democratizing access to the technologies that are often sometimes challenging to use as well as expensive to run. Yeah.
One of the things we're looking at is, and this as it also applies to sustainability, is earlier, I think it was last year, LinkedIn put out a report that talked about only 1 in 8 people actually have a sustainability skill, or a green skill, as it was called. And it's actually more stark for women. I think it's 1 in 10 women actually have a green skill. And so we've been thinking a lot about how do you close that skilling gap. One way we've been looking at closing that gap is through LinkedIn Learning and LinkedIn Learning pathways, and providing access on the LinkedIn platform to people to just download and take on these programs and learn a bit more about each of these areas, particularly around sustainability. Another is the use of GitHub. Earlier, GitHub published all of their open access sustainability coding and green coding opportunities. We're a founding member of the Green Software Foundation, and they've been looking at how do they put into place a carbon-aware SKU so developers can actually use it and think about how you program and code models with energy efficiency or carbon awareness and carbon efficiency in mind. So I think there's different ways where we're trying to create more access to the learning to actually build these models, develop these skill sets. So we expand the sustainability workforce in a much broader way and provide a curriculum that enables students to learn about sustainability, whether you want to be an engineer or you want to be a policy analyst or you want to be in the business space as well.
Fantastic. Are there folks in the audience that have questions? Do we have a mic runner? Please also introduce yourself.
Okay. Yes, my name is Joe Mirabella. It seems to me that the world's needs for energy is insatiable. And the question I have is, where do you think nuclear energy fits into trying to fill this need?
Great question. So at Microsoft, we believe we need a range of energy resources for the world to be on track for net zero. And so back in December, we published a paper about the important role that nuclear energy, small modular reactors, and fusion technology play in the overall energy mix. Interestingly, that was the same day that 22 countries around the world signed up to a commitment or a pledge to triple nuclear energy capacity in their countries as well. And we see that as a very encouraging sign about the role that nuclear energy, like small modular technologies and fusion power, play as being fundamental part of our energy mix as we go forward. Now, specifically for a company like Microsoft, we have actually invested in solutions in nuclear. One of them that I mentioned was our investment recently and in a power purchase agreement with Constellation to bring back online Unit 1 of the 3 Mile Island nuclear site in Pennsylvania, which is around 800 megawatts, a little over 800 megawatts of carbon-free power to come back online into that grid for that marketplace. We've also done a PPA with a fusion company named Helion out in Washington State to hopefully scale their technology when it comes into fruition and take power off of that facility as well. And you're seeing a proliferation, I would say, around an interest in what opportunities can corporations do to support the growth of nuclear power technologies as a carbon-free resource for the grids in which we operate.
There's a question here.
Thank you for your speech this morning. My name is Steve Anglin, the CEO of Utopia. I really liked what you said about Volt Energy. I'm actually good friends with Gilbert Campbell. And I think that Microsoft is a leader when it comes to those climate justice and things like that. But my question really focuses on because our company, we focus on heat, which is used to decarbonize steel, glass, cement, things like that. So I just want to know a little bit more about what is Microsoft doing in that area. I know with your data centers, you need to cool them, you need to heat them, and those are the things we work on. So you're not doing that with solar panels. So how are you looking at decarbonizing your data centers?
Great, thank you. And thanks for those comments. I mean, one thing I'd say there's two ones. So decarbonize the industrial sector as a whole. We've been investing in the upstream side of decarbonizing the inputs of those need to abate categories, whether it's steel and cement, by applying those technologies or thinking about how AI can apply to the technologies, rapidly scale them. Inside our data center itself, we've got a team that's really focused on all the different innovations one can deploy inside a data center, whether it's low, in the case of water is a good example. We're looking at new zero water cooled chips for some of our new AI chips has been an example. And looking at, how can we pilot low carbon steel or low carbon cement? When it comes to heating and cooling of those data centers, I think we're always looking at ways to improve the efficiency of how that's operating, because that's a core component. I gave one example on the excess heat, right, which is what we're doing in Finland and Denmark of putting that excess heat back into the system for municipal heating and cooling as well. And then working with a lot of our supply chain in the cooling space to look at what could we do to innovate there and what can that supply chain do to innovate to provide us a lower carbon input into our operations. But it really is a close partnership with the supply chain on what innovations are they seeing and they can do. What could we be asking for? Because as I mentioned, 96% of our reported emissions is coming from that supply chain value chain. I think that of that 96, over 3/4 is actually the supply chain itself. And so really working with many of these OEMs and partnerships on what types of innovations are they seeing, I think we become a strong partner to say, we need to reduce that embodied carbon. We actually have a supplier code of conduct that I think has been, I've heard from many suppliers that has been a key tool when we ask and we share what the supplier code of conduct asks for, which is moving to 100% clean power, delivering a 50% lower carbon footprint in their product to us. It helps generate a conversation inside their companies and calling on companies probably like yours to say, what can you do to help us lower our number so that what we send over on the books to a company like Microsoft is also lowered. But that goes to that ecosystem topic here, which is it is so much beyond the four walls of Microsoft. And if I could leave one impression here today is just, the full system has to change. We're a part of that. And how we engage our supply chain has a ripple effect really beyond not just our physical build, but others. So thank you for the question. I'd say if you ask me again in a month, we're hosting our first virtual sustainability supplier summit where we're providing them the tools that gets them started. Because I think it's not just putting out a supplier code of conduct and saying, here's what the code says, meet the code, but what are the tools we're actually providing our suppliers to make those changes? I will say we published a blog, I think it was last year, by our indirect procurement team, who works really closely with many of these suppliers. And they found that starting the conversation with the supplier to say, we need you to have a lower carbon footprint to report to us. They often were met with the question of, I don't know what my footprint is. I'm a small supplier. I don't have access to that information. And so then that became a really important conversation where we talked about the tools we have to offer to help them start to measure and track and monitor their emissions into a dashboard, into a data platform. So they started doing that. And then they were able to deliver some insights of, well, why is this facility more energy intensive than this other one when they should actually be the same? And they started to find those gaps in the system. And then that's actually delivering the low-hanging fruit options of where they can reduce. And for some of them, they're seeing the benefit of that reduction, which is starting them on that journey. So that's where I think we are. We're really sort of in the beginning stages of some of those engagements, but they're starting to get those insights.
So that's really interesting. I mean, Microsoft has such a huge engagement with suppliers and vendors. You also have a lot of relationships with customers, many of whom are running, in Azure or using Microsoft software products. How does that conversation go in that direction in terms of thinking about their sustainability goals?
No, and I'm glad you asked, because that's why I had that one slide with the three bubbles, as I call them. That customer, that second bubble, is really important because the amount of insights we get from the customers using our platform or working on sustainability, it's also been a great opportunity for me to meet with other chief sustainability officers at many of our customers. So that's been another area of insights where, customers working with Microsoft will talk about, well, Microsoft has these commitments on sustainability. We'd love to learn more. And then they'll bring their CSO into a meeting with myself. And we talk about not just what that customer journey looks like and what they're doing, but also share how we're going about it. And that type of exchange between their use of our products, we get feedback on that. I provide feedback into our product team as well, but also just having the ecosystem to pull in customers to talk about what are they doing to reduce emissions? How is data helping them or not? And then from the supply chain side, many of our customers, we share many of the same suppliers at the end of the day. So how can we have a common ask? A good example of this would be the advanced market commitment, and you'll hear about this probably later today. Google, Microsoft, and Nucor Steel Company came together to call for an advanced market commitment for low carbon energy. And through that process, we're seeing a lot of different solutions at play, but it's a great vehicle to pool a demand and pool an interest together from major players. And then suppliers will see, wait, you've got a large steel company, and two large tech companies asking for a response for information. I think that's been a great vehicle as well to show it's not just one entity, while a big entity or a small entity, but it's a pool of major demand that's coming in to ask for this in a coordinated fashion, I think is also really key to highlight there.
Questions? Yeah, over here.
Thank you. Hi, Luis Fuentes. I'm with Comline. We're a leading provider of separation technologies in the water, agricultural, and industrial sectors. I think you're right, Melanie. AI is not futuristic. It's here. I find myself using it every day. And I think the promise of what it can do for energy and sustainability is very encouraging. I also think there are some risks. So my question is, what is your take on the so-called P-doom or probability of doom? And what is Microsoft doing to make that number as small as possible?
Can you elaborate on PDOOM? I realize it's been a little while since I've been in school when everyone's laughing at that term, but I'm not sure I know what PDOOM is.
So it's this idea that there's a probability that AI and generative AI in particular can lead to the downfall of civilization. And so there's a podcast that I used to listen quite a bit called Hard Fork, and there was a period pretty much around the whole debacle with OpenAI and Sam Altman, going away and coming back, where they basically asked that question to everyone they brought on the podcast, and even the most optimistic people would say it's not zero. It's something higher than zero. So there are things that companies like Microsoft, I think, are doing to put guardrails and make a generative AI in particular safer.
So, I mean, I think you sort of probably got to where I'm going to answer this question, which is, it is about the guardrails. It's about things like the tech accord that Microsoft has been championing. It's about the safety and the security components to how we train models, build models. But, to quote a trustee of this university and my boss, Brad Smith, who wrote a book called, aptly titled Tools and Weapons, it really is about how do you focus on technology being used as a tool for the good and positive change, and do everything you can to mitigate the weaponization of it or the doom side of it. I think on sustainability, that's exactly why, we came here today to have this conversation, because you are talking about the duality of the technology when it comes to the energy transition. And it's really, really important to focus on the great research and the thought power and the brain power to ensuring that the positive outcomes of sustainability are achieved with AI, and that it's not the other side of the house. And so, to me, it fundamentally comes down to, like, are you a climate optimist or a pessimist? I fundamentally believe that the transition is going to happen. Will it happen fast enough? I think is an honest question. And that's where I think AI comes into play. I also fundamentally believe that renewables and sustainable power and carbon-free power is a better source of power for systems to be in a net zero world. So I think that's really kind of where I land on this, is that I believe if these systems can happen and change, we're going to get there. I also, I think, have a unique vantage point in seeing just incredible things happen over just the last 2 decades of time. Everything from, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and having a German energy system move off of gas, something seemingly impossible at the time, but has achieved, or being in private equity and thinking the first $1 trillion in clean energy investing would be years away. And as of last year, we're at over $1.8 trillion have been invested in the clean energy ecosystem. So I think that when I look backwards and I think about sort of the mountains that we've climbed, I get optimistic that I think the next big mountains are also achievable. We just need to harness the resources to do so.
There's a question over here.
Hi, Melanie. Thank you very much for the speech. It was amazing. My name is Madeline. I'm a second-year graduate student from ACEE. I have a question about, as a Chief Sustainability Officer, what has been typically the biggest challenge for you to achieve your sustainability goals? Especially my question is because Microsoft is such a big company that I think, yes, you can be so impactful because your impact is basically global, but also it's so big that how flexible is the company? How you as a Chief Sustainability Officer make decisions? How do you implement that to the whole company, I guess? Yeah.
I feel like I've been really fortunate to have the support of the executive leadership across the company towards our commitments to be carbon negative and water positive and zero waste. In particular, we put together a climate council, which is a group of leaders across all the different business units at Microsoft. And over the past year, we've all come together to collectively put forward over 80 interventions in the carbon space to get us on a path towards our carbon negative target. And to me, the work that is being done at Microsoft and as a CSO, it's about convening the various business leaders who are all leaning in to the commitments we've set and looking within their value chain and their supply chain and what are the actions they can take to make those targets happen. Now, at the end of the day, for Microsoft to hit our commitments, that's fantastic, but that still doesn't change the trajectory of where the world is moving. And so the other key part for us is how we engage the broader ecosystem like customers to make that change happen. For me, I think the biggest challenge is the fact that there are things outside of what all the leaders at Microsoft are doing to lean in within their own value chain and supply chain that are just 1 or 2 steps beyond their control, that require a much broader ecosystem. It requires the CSOs at all these other companies to be doing the same thing that we're trying to do inside ours to deliver that change that then ladders to our overall commitments. As CSO, I'm responsible for how we meet those carbon moonshots and those water targets. And part of that relies on what our supply chain does as well. And that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges is how do we build an ecosystem where our supply chain has the tools and resources to invest in those opportunities as well, not just Microsoft.
Other questions, please?
Within your power purchase agreements, do you have incentives for superior performance or penalties for poor performance on the part of your suppliers?
I'd say also a challenge as being a chief sustainability officer is that we don't know all the details to the work that goes into it. I think it's a great question. I'm not sure about the actual details within a PPA when it comes to incentives or penalties. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thinking about the productivity enhancements coming out of AI, and I'm thinking about there's so much energy going into building AI and the capabilities of AI. But once everybody works with AI, what is the energy consumption afterwards? I was at 3 conferences over the last couple of weeks, and people were saying, well, somebody doing due diligence in legal would take 10 people, 10 days to do the work that now can be done in 3 hours by 1 person. The carbon footprint of somebody working with AI in that sense seems like it would be much less than if they didn't have AI in the first place. So when you think about the total energy consumption of people working with AI, do you think it's going up, going down? What do you think the outlook would be?
I've heard of that, this, how do you measure like the human consumption and the time, the productivity? I'd say this is exactly kind of why I said we're just at the beginning. The life cycle analysis to factor in the human productivity element, I have not seen. And if people have seen a methodology on that, I'd love to see it. I think this is an area where as we are getting more inputs in, as more people are using it, as we're seeing, we've measured productivity increases in terms of, with like phone calls or, in the service industry, happier customers or faster time to response rate. That's where we've seen the productivity increases, but we haven't, because it's a data number. It's just, time for a phone call, time for a response, and then quality of response. And you kind of put all those metrics together. But what I haven't seen is factoring that in. But the point you make is exactly the point that I think is important to underscore here is there's so much uncertainty in what are we calculating when we think about the energy impact, the kilowatt energy or the CO2 impact of a model. Where do you start the methodology and where do you end that methodology? How do you think about inferencing and training and the energy consumption there once these models are built? And then more importantly, how do you think about the difference between a large model or a small model or a model running on the edge of a PC computer? And again, these are all, I feel like I have more questions than answers because of where we're at this stage. But that's also why I really liked the World Energy Outlook from the IEA a couple of weeks ago that had a whole chapter devoted to a range of uncertainties that are in the system to date. And I think it was a chapter that I was really excited to read because it highlights we're only at the beginning. And so to make pronouncements or forecasts with certainty about whether it's the doom side, the P-doom aspect or not, I think it's way too early to make any of those assessments because we're just starting to use the solution at scale today and haven't even begun to see or calculate those positive impacts. But I come down as a climate optimist. So obviously I come down the side that I do believe the productivity increases and the ability to accelerate AI for the sustainability solutions is far going to outweigh the ramp in the near term for the initial energy consumption or carbon consumption of building the model or building the data center will be far outweighed by what the actual impacts are, because we're already seeing that today.
Yep, right here.
Should have sat at the side, sorry. My name's Matt. I'm an editor at Nature Publishing Group. I want to draw back to, I think, Jennifer's opening question and the question about doom. So about the increase in the number of chief sustainability officers at large corporations. And the doom element is that kind of globally, popularist governments are generally very anti-sustainability. And I'm interested in where you would see the trend in kind of corporate support for sustainability going if government and regulatory kind of support were to dip from where they currently are?
Well, one of the things in that question is regulations and policy. Where is it? What we're seeing out of Europe is an enhanced and growing need for more corporate disclosures around environmental, social, and governance metrics, which one could also call sustainability metrics. So you have out of Europe the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, CSRD, and the CSDDD, which I believe is Due Diligence Directive as well. And then you had an SEC motion here in the United States. You have work coming out of Asia, all requiring in mandatory financial disclosures, environmental, social, and governance data. I don't see that going away. In fact, I see that only increasing. And therefore, that requires people in-house at companies to be able to have that data, report on that data, and not in a voluntary basis, but in a mandatory basis. And so that's the trend that I see moving in this space, is that a growing need for more transparency by corporations in what their impacts are and what they're doing, particularly starting right now in Europe, parts of Asia, and likely moving across the world, similar to the way GDPR moved across the world in terms of requiring companies to provide a disclosure that's out there. So that's where I see, regardless of the political environment that's there, there's just an incredible need and growing need and concern around understanding with more specificity what are the impacts of companies. The second thing I'd offer is the business case around sustainability, whether you call it sustainability, whether you call it social license to operate. For so many companies, access to water is a fundamental part of the business. Access to a healthy workforce, fundamental to the business. Providing energy efficiency is actually a net ROI benefit for almost every business. If you can save energy or have access to a reliable source of power. If we believe that renewables coupled with batteries is actually a more reliable and sustainable source of power, that's going to outcompete fossil energy. So to me, I see it more from the perspective of what are the fundamental impacts we're driving with our work, and how does that relate to core business metrics, and focusing on those areas of where the future heads.
Other questions? Yeah, you there?
Thank you. Mohammed, I'm a PhD student here at Princeton. I wanted to bring the conversation back to the material side of data centers. With like the big and massive build out of data centers, this created kind of like an opportunity for like low carbon cement and low carbon steel. And it's the kind of like offtake that, for example, if you're building a low carbon steel plant, you would need like long-term offtakers. And with like expected like demand that's coming consistently from data centers year after year, that's the kind of thing that could be catalyzed to like bring like low carbon steel investments and de-risk some of these projects. But a lot of them also come with like premiums. So I was just like wondering if you're starting to think about like maybe using your purchasing power, like collective purchasing power, to unlock some of these investments, and the appetite for a premium. Like if it's like triple digit, for example, for steel, or like maybe low double digits. What do you think about that?
Two things on that. One, as I mentioned, there's an opportunity here for those companies that can do more, that they should. And so through the Climate Innovation Fund, we've been really working hard on a strategy called Invest to Procure, where we actually provide equity investment out of the Climate Innovation Fund into companies like Stegra, Carbon Cure, that's a low carbon cement company. So that with that investment, we also then discuss with those businesses a procurement play. What kind of procurement offtake can we make? There are now, I'm happy to say, several coalitions. We're part of one of them, the Rocky Mountain Institute's Green Steel Buyers Coalition, where it's pooling a bunch of buyers for green steel. So you have the demand side and saying, we are all keen to buy into this marketplace, and therefore, create the supply, and we're willing to pay for that. We've also, I would look to the sustainable aviation fuel market, because that's a great area where you think about who pays a green premium and for how long and in what capacity. So I raised sustainable aviation fuel and sustainable aviation fuel certificates, or SAF-C certificates. This is what we would call a book and claim model, where we have partnered with a company, Alaska Airlines, and an innovative low carbon fuel supplier called 12, out based in Washington State. They've created an E-jet, a sustainable E-jet. Alaska wants to fly a sustainable fuel. We want to make sure that our fuel that we use as a business can be a lower carbon fuel, but we don't have airplanes to fly around that fuel in. And so we created a three-party partnership between Alaska, Microsoft, and 12. Microsoft has invested in 12's first facility to get it up and going and the supply off of that. Alaska's going to fly that fuel, and we've created the SAF-C certificate. So Microsoft gets the certificate for that low carbon fuel towards our Scope 3 books and for our fuel purchases. Alaska gets to fly that fuel and deliver a low carbon value for themselves. And then 12 gets sustainable offtake. So those are the kind of innovative partnerships that I believe we need to see more of and scale. And we're happy to be a first mover in that space, but we need friends. And so what we're doing to work with the other CSOs that I mentioned is share these stories, share the Volt PPA example, and just share the examples of what we're testing out and piloting or doing, with the hope that others can join in so we scale a market.
Wonderful. I think we'll have to end on that note, but thanks so much, Melanie, for the conversation and for your remarks this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.